games! I will give you the greatest games on earth!
Show them you can fight or die trying.
From the producers of 300.
A 4-horse race is a suicide.
Let the games begin!
Starring Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins.
Behold, this arena will be built for Rome.
Rise or die.
Those About to Die. A new Peacock original series streaming July 18th.
As we approach the final few weeks of the first year of this podcast, I invite you to go back and search the episodes that deal with tornadoes. There's been a lot of them. They make this podcast for a reason. They were powerful, they changed lives, and they were memorable as a result. Hi, I'm Chris May, host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast from the Weather Network in Canada. The May 10th through 13th, 2010 outbreak affected large areas of Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas. And it all started this day in weather history. Tornadoes are horrifying and swift. They're in, they terrorize, they destroy, sadly sometimes even kill, and then they're gone. So for an outbreak to go on continuously for 4 days, man, that's just out of control. This one started today, May 10th, and began what would go on to prove to be a major tornado outbreak as ever there had been for this region, with the bulk of the activity in central and eastern Oklahoma. In this onslaught, there were over 60 tornadoes. To most people who don't make a life out of chasing these monsters, one is enough to see in a lifetime, so 60 is rather difficult to comprehend. Some of these twisters were large and multi-vortex in nature, meaning that they had several centers of rotation within one massive system. Think tornadoes within tornadoes. This outbreak went nuts all over large portions of Oklahoma while scraping the borders of southern Kansas and that little notch exposing the southwestern corner of Missouri. But, and again I have covered this on this podcast already, major metropolitans who were directly hit by tornadoes. In this outbreak, the most destructive tornadoes, and yes, I used it plurally, that went on to cause the most severe damage was in the southern suburbs. Again, yes, there were people living there in a center of dense population. And this destruction of which I speak was in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area just east of Norman, Oklahoma, and it was responsible for 3 fatalities. Remember that this day in weather history can be enjoyed a number of ways. Right now, you are listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there is also the daily podcast video short. They are shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, and oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event, from when it happened, in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. In the end, and after all the reports were confirmed, the National Weather Service in Norman compiled a consensus of information on the tornado outbreak that occurred across central Oklahoma on May 10th. Here now are some of those facts. It was confirmed that in the Norman County area from today's story, that's where we were centered and where the greatest amount of damage was done, there was a total of 36 tornadoes confirmed just in this one area, with additional confirmed touchdowns in eastern Oklahoma around Tulsa, another relatively large city too, by the way. This would be recognized as the second largest tornado outbreak in the state of Oklahoma in their recorded history, second only to the events of May 3rd of 1999. I mentioned the several storms that swept through the areas, and many of them having multi-vorticities buried within. In all, there was an astounding 13 different storms that were responsible for this volume of tornadoes. There was literally no room to move, nowhere to go, and no break between storms the way this played out. The tornado damage paths, they were spread over a north-south area of over 200 miles. That's over 320 kilometers. It had a massive footprint, and the hail, well, it was very large. There were reports from several locations of up to softball-sized stones of ice which equates to 4¼ inches, which is roughly over 10¾ centimeters. While the loss of 3 lives was tragic, the casualties could have been easily much higher, considering how fast these 13 tornado-producing storms moved, the sheer intensity of them, the time of day that they struck, and of course when you consider the density of population that they impacted. Now, along with the 3 who died, there were at least another 450 people who sustained injuries. But again, miraculously, most of them were minor. And it was estimated to have cost over $595 million in damages. And this 4-day event took off like a runaway freight train this day in weather history. Tomorrow is May 11th, and it was on this day back in 1934 when a massive gusty storm sent millions of tons of dry, parched topsoil flying across the country from the Great Plains region all the way to the Atlantic coast. There is a very poignant reason behind this that was actually a much bigger story than anything else going on at that time in that country's history. Only they didn't know it at the time. This mystery is solved tomorrow on this day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.